Okay, good evening once again. Thank you for joining us on this Bible study. Can you trust the Bible? That's the topic that we have been studying. So far, we studied how did we get the Bible. We also looked at the canonization of the Bible. We also looked at non-canonical books, why some books are not included in the Bible. Last week, we looked at science. Does science disprove the Bible? We looked at evidence about science and Bible. And this week we will look at archaeology. As I was preparing, I thought I have to make it in two parts. So we'll see how this goes. And of course, there's other things we will work it out. Today, part 5, does archaeology disprove the Bible? There's so much evidence in the Bible. We can't study everything. So I just took one or two examples just to give you a taste of what you can personally. Nowadays, it's not a rocket science. If you go on YouTube and just type, does archaeology disprove the Bible or evidence for Bible in archaeology? Oh, so many wonderful videos you can find. So, but I'm going to give you a bit of things that will help you to maybe dig deeper and study. So today we will look at Old Testament, and next week I made it into two parts so that at least we have some time to think about. Maybe next week we will look at the New Testament. Quickly going through archaeology. What is archaeology? Archaeology, sometimes spelled archaeology, is the study of human activity through the recovery and analysis of material culture. Archaeology is often considered a branch of socio-cultural anthropology, but archaeologists also draw from biology, geological, and environmental system through their study of the past. Simply, it's the study of the past based on the evidence they find by digging or discovering things of the old age. That's basically is what is archaeology. Now look at this professor of archaeology at the University of Tel Aviv. This is what he says. Tel Aviv is the capital of Jerusalem. So look at, he says, this is what archaeologists have learned from their excavations in the land of Israel. The Israelites were never in Egypt, did not wander in the desert, did not conquer the land in a military campaign, and did not pass it on to the 12 tribes of Israel. Can you imagine? Right from the heart of Israel, one of the archaeologists says, this is all nonsense. They have never, there's no excavations to prove all these things. Right from there, look at this man, Yasser Arafat. I think some of us know him. He says the notion of a Jewish origin in Jerusalem is a religious myth used to justify occupation and colonialism. Well, you can see a political statement on this because of the rivalry they have with Israel. He's saying they're actually a myth, is whatever. His statement, we don't have to take it serious because politicians, you hardly see them tell the truth anyway. But look at this man. This man is very interesting for our study for tonight. His name is Dr. Adam Zertel. He's a chairman of the Department of Archaeology in the University of Haifa. This is what happened. He grew up in a place called Ein Shemer. It says a kibbutz affiliated with the Hashomer Hatzer movement. Zertel was severely wounded in the Yom Kippur War. He later told a reporter for the Jerusalem Post, I spent a year at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. So when he was wounded, he spent 1 year in Jerusalem in the hospital. And he says during that time, he became interested in archaeology. He says, although I had argued that the Bible was full of myths, I decided after my recovery to travel the land by foot to look for archaeological evidence, which means he didn't believe in Bible. He thought Bible stories are all myths. There's no evidence, but I don't know what would have happened during that 1 year in Jerusalem in the hospital while recovering. Well, I'm in the land of what the Bible claims to be. Let me walk around and see if I can find some evidence for what the Bible claims. I think that's what he decided. So he says, after years of research, he says, however, I believe it is impossible to explore Israel's origin without the Bible. That's his conclusion. Again and again, we have seen the historical value of the Bible. Again and again, we have seen that an accurate memory has been preserved in its transmuted narrative, waiting to be unearthed and exposed by archaeological field work and critical mind work. Then, in a survey called Manasseh survey, the nearly 1,000 new sites, how many? 1,000 new sites exposed create a new archaeological reality which connected the book of Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges to the territory where they have happened. So he basically concentrated on the book of Deuteronomy and the stories of Joshua and Judges to see if there is evidence to what the Bible is claiming. And he says there are over 1,000 new sites. Can you imagine what that means? That's what he says. Now, talking about his excavations, as he read the Bible, he read about this called the altar of Joshua. Look at Deuteronomy 27:4. Therefore it shall be when you have crossed over the Jordan, that on Mount Ebal you shall set up these stones which I commanded you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime. And there you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall not use an iron tool on them. Look at these instructions. And Moses commanded the people on the same day, saying, These shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people when you have crossed over the Jordan. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. How many of them? 6 tribes. 6 tribes were to stand where? On Mount Gerizim to bless the people. What about the other 6 tribes? Look at what it says. Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these shall stand on Mount Ebal to curse. So the other one, to curse. And that is for blessing. Who are to stand on the Mount Ebal to curse? Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. He said 6 people, 6 tribes on one Mount Gerizim, which is called the Mount of Blessing. The other one, Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curse. Now, this is what we again read in Joshua 8:30. That's what the instructions, but look at what God says. Now, Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones over which no man has wielded an iron tool. That means they have to pick up stones which were not cut or any iron has been put. Remember, altar represents what? Jesus himself. So it must be almost like an unblemished thing. That's the kind of tools or stones that they have to find. And then over which no man has wielded an iron. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. So when Adam Zattel, the archaeologist, read these passages, then he said, is this really true? Did Joshua build an altar on Mount Ebal? So he said, maybe this is one way he can actually look into the archaeological evidence to see if this is true. Then he started going towards Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal to see if there is any evidence. And when he actually found, during that time, there were other archaeologists who are actually saying this. For example, Dr. Lawrence Tagger is a professor of the archaeology of Israel at Harvard University. Remember, one of the renowned world universities. This is what he said. If a sacrificial altar stood on Mount Ebal, its impact on our research is revolutionary. All of us have to go back to kindergarten. Because until then, they did not really find any evidence or what do you call it, evidence for what they were actually looking for. So what did he say? If suppose there is any element of evidence for the altar that stood on Mount Ebal, then all our archaeological maybe evidence or whatever we think is a myth on the Bible, we have to go back to kindergarten and relearn again. That's what he said. But let's see what Dr. Adam Zettel has actually found out. Well, we all know from the history, this is how it is. Mount Gerizim, according to Moses, 6 tribes were to stand on that mountain to pronounce blessings. Mount Ebal, another 6 tribes have to stand, and for that is a symbol for curses. In between these two mountains is a valley, which is called Shechem. Now you can read this in Deuteronomy, it is Shechem. So what happened? Mount Gerizim, this is where Zettel's choice. He was working on Mount Gerizim, and now, right now, of course, there is a plaque there telling about the archaeological site. But before we get there, this is just a picture taken in 1980. This is just recent. Can you imagine? 1980. It's not. It's around 42 years old now when they discovered. Now, between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, in between those two is the valley called Shechem. There's a beautiful city right now there, but the distance, the radius distance is around 1 mile, that is 1.6 kilometers. So those days, you know that people didn't have microphones or whatever, they just spoke. Now, people standing on Mount Gerizim, when they pronounced blessings, people on Mount Ebal have to hear. Imagine, this is not 1 or 2 people, all the tribes. So you could imagine when you speak from here, 1 mile from here, somebody have to hear. And the tests were done if that is possible. And they found, yes, it is possible to hear, because those days they didn't have any a means of using microphones or other things to enhance voice, but it is possible, they discovered. Anyway, that's the distance. Now, what did they find there? When he went, pottery, ash, and bones were found inside the altar. They found an altar. I'll show you the pictures later. And there they found pottery items. The pottery was dated to the 13th century BC, during the time of the Exodus. Exactly. The ashes and bones of 942 individuals equated to 50 to 100 male sheep, goat, and cattle were examined at the Department of Zoology at the University of Haifa and were found to be kosher. They did not find, I mean, it's really interesting. I was watching few videos. No unclean animal in the Bible of any of its bones or any of its things were found there. Only clean animals, all about 1 year of age and in keeping with exactly what the Bible said is the kind of animals that must be sacrificed. In fact, persistently they were trying to find some evidence of any pig or any other unclean item of a bone or anything of that, just to disprove this cannot be the altar. But only to their surprise, they found 942 kinds of individual items, but they're all male sheep, goat, and cattle. And they're all found with kosher means, you know that for sacrifice, an animal must be unblemished, unspotted, and it must be within 1 year. So archaeologists have actually said all these evidence show that the animals were kosher and they're about 1 year of age in keeping. If this had been a Canaanite altar, the bones of eagles, snakes, and various unclean animals would have been found. Because there were some, Canaanites also offered sacrifices to their gods. They didn't, but their kind of sacrifices, they offered every kind of thing they could. History tells us eagles, snakes, and many other unclean animals. They ruled out that this cannot be a Canaanite altar because of the evidence they found, about 42 articles that point, every one of them, to the kosher animals and sacrificial things. Now, this is how on Mount Gerizim, overall aerial view looked like, and they found the altar. And in the picture form, this is how it looks. Archaeologists sites in the shape of a foot or a sandal dated in the 13th or 12th century BC. That's the exact time of the Israelites' occupation of the land of Canaan, have been found throughout the Jordan Valley. For decades, archaeologists have debated the purpose of these sites and the identity of their builders, with some suggesting that these sites were built by the Israelites entering the promised land and settling in it. Ralph K. Hawkins, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Everett University, addressing these varying interpretations in his article, Israelite Footprints. He said he called them Israelite footprints. There is a reason why he came up with this. Has Adam Zetzel found the biblical altar on Mount Ebal and the footprints of the Israelites settling the promised land? In the March of 2016, imagine how recent it is, issue of Biblical Archaeology Review, they actually published this article. Now the people, look at what it says. Now the people came up from the Jordan onto the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Now, every place, look at, this is what God promised to Israelites. Every place on which the sole of your foot tread shall be yours. From the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even to the western sea, shall be your territory. Look at another, Joshua 1:3. He promised to Moses, now he's promising to Joshua. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. So they found some kind of prints of a footprint in few places, and they were wondering why in the shape of a footprint. Could it be that to say that everywhere the Lord promised, wherever the sole of your foot is tread, that's what I will give you. Maybe God, the Israelites put their stamp on it, claiming the promises of God, that this belongs to them by promise given by God. I want to actually show you a video here from YouTube. Let me just stop this and get onto the YouTube video. Where is it? Where's the other one? Can you see the video? Can somebody respond?
Yes, we can see the video, but
okay. Yeah. Just see a bit of evidence. He's an archaeologist.
Did you share the sound though?
You can't hear it?
No, we can see the wording, the subtitles.
Oh, how does sound thing work?
It should be at the bottom where it's when you were doing the shared, it should give you an option to put sound in as well. Let me have a look on mine. It's on the Zoom thing, not on that though.
It's on the Zoom.
Yeah, when you put shared screen, it should allow you to have, when you share screen with a audio, it should also give you an option below to say to share the audio as well.
Oh. Share sound, yeah?
Try that.
Okay, just a truck.
Yeah.
So the altar, I don't know if you can see it, but it's up to my left here. Here it is.
Sorry, can somebody respond? Can you hear?
We can hear it now.
Okay.
This is Mount Ebal. In the Bible, Joshua 8:30 says, "Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord." In the 1980s, Israeli archaeologist Adam Zertal discovered and excavated a stone altar on Mount Ebal and identified it as Joshua's altar. Mount Ebal is located north of the Dead Sea and about 30 miles north of Jerusalem in the West Bank of Israel. South of Mount Ebal is Mount Gerizim, and between them the biblical city of Shechem. This is what the region looks like today. The ruins of Shechem are in the Palestinian city of Nablus, between Mount Gerizim to the south and Mount Ebal to the north. Just to the north of Shechem, Mount Ebal rises to 3,805 feet above sea level, and located on the eastern side of the mountain, a considerable distance to the north of Shechem, is the stone altar Zertal excavated. This altar was discovered by Adam Zertal from the University of Haifa. He was doing a survey in this area, and in 1980 he found this structure, and from 1982 to 1984 he excavated it and ended up interpreting it as not only an altar, but the altar that is talked about in Deuteronomy and Joshua, that Joshua built and the Israelites here on Mount Ebal. Now, Zertal's interpretation was met by a bunch of skepticism. So recently a curse tablet was discovered that comes from Zertal's excavation site. And so this has brought the debate back to the surface. And so the arguments are swirling around again. There's many arguments that are posed against this altar being Joshua's altar, but one of the main ones is its location. What I want to do for this video is focus on the location of this altar. Is there anything in the Bible that would contradict its location or disqualify Zertal's interpretation that this is Joshua's altar? Or is there good reasons for why the Israelites may have chosen this as the site and location for the altar? Now, the wrong location argument is that the altar that Zertal found is not located close to the important biblical city of Shechem. It doesn't overlook Shechem. It's located a couple miles further to the north on a slope of Mount Ebal. And indeed, it's true that when you are at Zertal's excavation area where the altar is, you can't see the ruins of Shechem because it's located a couple miles further south. So therefore, it's pretty simple. The Bible says that Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal, and Dr. Zertal discovered and excavated a stone altar on Mount Ebal. There is nothing in the Bible that is more specific. It's very general. There's nothing that specifies where the altar was built on the mountain. So there's nothing in the Bible that contradicts or disqualifies Zertal's interpretation that the altar that he discovered and excavated is the altar of Joshua. Really, when you're thinking of an orientation of worship towards Shechem, there really isn't an ideal place on Mount Ebal for this to happen. Even if you're on the summit of the mountain, the highest place, you still can't from there see the ruins of Shechem because the slopes of Mount Ebal towards the south are very gradual until they finally drop off towards the city. So really the only place that you're overlooking Shechem is on these steep slopes, and this would not be ideal to gather a large multitude of Israelite worshipers. Somebody chose this location for an altar. Why did they choose this location? Well, obviously it is oriented towards the east. We know this because Zertal's team uncovered the ramp on the western side of the altar. If a priest is ascending the altar on the ramp and offering sacrifices, then he is facing the east. So there's nothing in the Bible that mandates that the orientation of the altar on Mount Ebal should be towards Shechem. There is information in the Bible that gives the sacred direction as being east. It says in Exodus 27:13 that the courtyard is to be on the east end toward the sunrise. And of course, the altar is in the courtyard. So the altar is on the east side of the temple. So it makes biblical sense that the altar on Mount Ebal would be on the east side of the mountain, oriented in the direction of east where the sun rises. And when you're thinking of an Eastern orientation, then the location of the altar that Zertal found is ideal. And this is because there is a natural shelf or bench, and the altar itself is on the eastern side of that. So you have this flat area, and then you have the western slopes of the mountain. If you're looking at it, it's like a theater where a multitude of Israelite worshipers could gather, and all of them would be facing the sacrificial altar as well as the direction of east. So after the ceremony on Mount Ebal, the Israelites go down to Shechem and renew the covenant. And we're told about this in Deuteronomy 27:11, which gives the instructions that 6 tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people, and the other 6 tribes shall stand on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses. Mount Ebal is the mountain of curses. That's why Joshua didn't build the altar on Mount Gerizim. You don't need an altar of sacrifice on the Mount of Blessings. You need it on the mountain of curses. Joshua 8:30 says that Joshua built the altar on top of Mount Ebal. And then a few verses later in verse 32, it says Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses. There was a copy of the law at the altar on the Mount of Curses. Can you imagine that when the plaster was still intact, the law of the Lord was at this place? So this foreshadowing event helps us understand our own reality. In Galatians 3:10, it says, "For all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. As it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law." We are on the Mount of Curses. We don't need an altar of sacrifice somewhere else. We need it where we are. And this is why a few verses later in verse 13, it says, "Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole." Jesus came.
Well, yeah, well, there's so many other videos you could see. I just wanted you to give a glimpse. You remember the Mount of Blessing and Mount of Curses, and why the altar was on the Mount of Curses, because that's where the curses are. God came to remove the curse. What a kind of, it's not a coincidence, what a kind of providence God has put even at that time as a symbol of his coming to remove the curse that was on this earth. So in your own free time, just type Mount Ebal, the altar of Joshua. Please watch, so many videos are there. It will really enhance your knowledge of the evidence of what the Bible says. So after discovering Dr. Adam Zettel, was so amazed, and he actually threw a challenge. Look at it. Then he says, what happened regarding the new accumulation of facts that I have cited? Almost nothing, since the appearance of the detailed report and the many articles I have published on the excavations. What was the response from the archaeological world and other scholars? He says, silence has descended on the scholarly world. Many could not even go to argue with him because he has found the evidence of exactly what the Bible was saying. And that's when this man, professor of Harvard, archaeologist, he says, if a sacrificial altar stood on Mount Ebal, its impact on our research is what? Revolutionary. All of us have to go back to kindergarten. He has to admit that if that is true, we all have to unlearn what we have to and start from the scratch again. Can you imagine what a profound statement that is? So that's about the altar of Joshua on Mount Ebal. Let's look at this one about the city of Jericho. Here is an archaeologist. This is recently, again, 1952 to 58, Kathleen Kenyon. She said, the city belonged to time much earlier and could not be biblical Jericho based on the absence of the imported Cypriot pottery from Cyprus, were pottery. She said that city of Jericho where the Bible mentions could not be the one that actually the archaeologists have found. She also acknowledged things were blackened and reddened by fire. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burnt. But trying to discredit the Bible, but the evidence is so strong, she could not resist but to tell what they found out in that city. The debris was actually caused by what? Fire. And in most rooms, they were heavily burnt. We know what happened to the city of Jericho. It was burned down after its collapse. Now, trying to disprove her There's another professor, Bryant Wood, professor of Eastern Studies, University of Toronto. He found the diagnostic pottery on the east side of a more prosperous part of the city. So he tried to do the archaeology on the other side of the city, and he found much more evidence to prove the city of Jericho is what the Bible describes is indeed the city. For example, Joshua 2:15 says, "Then she led them down by a rope through the window of her house was on the city wall. She dwelt on the wall." In other words, we know who was this? Rahab. She lived in the city of Jericho. Where was her house? Her house was actually on the wall of the city, I believe. This is what the Bible says. And through the window of her house was on the city wall. She dwelt on the wall. So people thought, how can the house be on the city wall? It can't be true. So they couldn't believe this kind of a story. But this is what, look at what the discovery. Dr. Wood points to collapsed mud bricks from the city wall that fell to the base of the retaining wall at Jericho. For example, look at his left foot, rests on part of the fallen wall. Now, what he found? He found a continuous series of Egyptian scarabs which dated inscriptions on bottom, unbroken series extended from 18th century BC to time of Israelites' conquest. So the city existed even, okay, some more evidence. They found in that city, what did they find? Jars full of grain. This was founded by John Garstang at Jericho. Look at these jars. He says they were charred in the fire that the Israelites set to destroy the Canaanite city. They found the jars, they found the grains in the jars, but they're all burnt. That's what they found. For example, we were talking about the wall of Jericho. Can the house be attached to the wall of Jericho? This is how the archaeologists have come up with. This is the bit of a wall that was still standing, and this is the evidence they found. If you see the step part of it, that's the wall, and then you could see like a house, a room-like thing attached to the wall. That's the city wall attached to the wall. And so they did find that houses did exist on the walls of the city. Moreover, based on her profession, people who walk by the city, it is much more easier for them as they enter the city to find a place of pleasure and luxury. That's what the evidence have found. So the city of Jericho indeed is mentioned. The excavations indeed fits into the biblical city of Jericho that is found. Bit more evidence. The Hittites, a civilization lost and found. Many scholars, except from Bible, for until recent times, there was no historical evidence or archaeological evidence of the people of Hittites or the tribe of Hittite. They say it is a myth because outside Bible, nowhere it mentions. They didn't find any evidence. So that's what was the kind of knowledge people had. But look at this. For example, the Hittites. Bible makes reference to the Hittite Empire at almost 40 times. But however, until 100 years ago, that means almost recently, there was no archaeological evidence to substantiate the biblical claim that the Hittites existed. So skeptics declared that the Bible was in error because they couldn't find no evidence until their mouths were suddenly stopped when, in 1906, Hugo Winkler uncovered a huge library of how many? 10,000 clay tablets, which completely documented the lost Hittite Empire. Then we now know that at its height, the Hittite civilization rivaled Egypt and Assyria in its glory and power. Imagine, until 1906, there was no evidence found either in history or in archaeology. Maybe history, they had something, but archaeologically, they didn't find anything. So they said, Bible is a myth. It's made up stories. But when they discovered, now they didn't find one or two, almost 10,000 clay tablets that spoke about the empire of the Hittites. And they also, through those tablets, came to know It existed along with contemporary to Egypt and Assyria. And that's what the Bible exactly says. For example, this they found, this was discovered in 1828, Egyptian, and 1906, Hittite. This is the present location is in Istanbul, and this piece is now in Archaeological Museum. Now, if you see this, the Egyptian Hittite peace treaty, they found this clay tablet where you can see the inscriptions where it actually is talking about a peace treaty between Ramses II, that is the Egyptian king, and Hattusili III, that is the Hittite king, in the 13th century BC, exactly the time frame of where the Bible speaks about the Hittites. These are few examples of the evidence we find in the Old Testament. There's so many other things that we can speak of, but just to give you a little bit of the first things of Dr. Adam Zetzel, you can type his name and also see many other things that were discovered and how people are finding. All that I'm trying to say here is, can archaeology disprove the Bible? The evidence is against it. In other words, archaeology actually defends the scriptures. Whatever the Bible said and whatever they could find, it exactly fitted into the description that the Bible speaks about. So you can see the evidence of how much we can see that Bible can be trusted. And that's what I would like to share about that. Well, we still have time. I'm not sure if I could cover the New Testament, but maybe we could spend a little time talking or asking questions and sharing our thoughts. Next time we come, we will look at the archaeological evidence for New Testament. So let me stop recording.